Hello, this is Off to Battle with Jeremiah Bork, and this is a recap video of everything I've learned playing High Queen Khalida as the Tomb Kings in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires beta. And this means that everything here is acquired in Warhammer 3. I did not play the Tomb Kings in Warhammer 2, which is why I had to play the hell out of Khalida in order to understand everything that I did for producing this video here. So I hope to impart some wisdom, and let's get started. So number one, just to get this out of the way, Tomb King's garrisons suck. They really suck. And I really want to emphasize that because it's important. Tomb King garrisons are expensive, but they suck. There are no heroes in order to increase the leadership of the units as they are fighting. Now, there is one barricade type building which does raise leadership by like 10. It's just very difficult to get the Tomb Kings to fight and win as a defending garrison, even against relatively light threats. They are really there as speed bumps, and there are certain factions where this is always going to be true. But you can't, as the Tomb Kings, just recruit a lord randomly to stiffen the spine of a garrison. You just can't do it. You are impoverished for army capacity. So unless you have a spare entire army that you could raise, but you are not raising as an emergency measure, then you just can't get this done. So it's very difficult to make the Tomb King garrisons work. You need them later in the game because you need those speed bumps in order to slow down a conquest of half your empire, but you just have to work around it. You need to let the enemies cut into the flesh but not the bone. You need to protect your capital cities at all costs, but you can and must afford to let minor settlements go, because minor settlements are bait and decoys for enemy armies in effect. And what you need to do is to just get into the best possible position where you can go fight them, or you can at least besiege them, but you can afford to lose minor settlements, and you often will, because the garrisons suck. You just have to plan around it. Now, another thing to get out of the way is that Ushabti great bows in Immortal Empires can target walls and towers in a siege. So and I don't mean the buildable towers that every archer can shoot at. I mean they can shoot at the actual walls, the actual gates, the actual towers from high-level Skaven settlements that rip you to shreds if you don't do anything about them and you drift into their line of fire. This is very, very important, especially as Khalida, because she no longer starts with her old units. She starts with one Great Bow unit and one Screaming Skull's Catapult. So the Skull's Catapult is very good if you add a Casket of Souls very early, which I pretty much always will now. That's very good, but you'll often be in situations where you can't actually use this effectively, so it's sort of wasted in a way, but the Great Bows are such great units anyway, you do want them. So uh, just go ahead and see walls collapse and drop like flies. So Khalida really needs constructs. In Warhammer 3, at least at this point in the beta, you have three early options for constructs. Number one, Ushabti. And you do start with one Great Bow unit, so you have to take that into account because that is one unit that you have zero capacity for. So if you lose it, you can't get it back until you build a Tier 3 Ushabti building. There is a Tier 2 one that's very cheap, and that gives you one Ushabti. You can build that in minor settlements, and it can be a very good idea to do so, but it takes a while. But it's still very, very nice to have them. Their main difference between the units is that one obviously has the projectiles, but the other has 16 units on Ultra rather than 12, and that is a big difference in terms of striking power. Ushabti are shockingly fast when your main units, early game, skeletons, spearmen, and warriors, and so on, they go at a speed of 28. The Ushabti are like 53 or something. Uh, so it's a huge difference. So you can use them almost like cavalry, but they're just nice, not so much beefy, but they can be very dangerous anti-armor monstrous infantry. So you really like having more of them. So you just have to be careful that they're not really meant to take lots of damage for you. They're not damage sucks. Number 2 is the Tomb Scorpion, and you can only build this tier 3 building in the major settlement of a given province. So you can only build one of these buildings at a time in one province, and that only gives you the capacity for one Tomb Scorpion. So the only way to spam these is through Necrotechs. Now that's a combination of their traits, and once they get high enough level, you start being able to add capacity for something. And if you pick the Tomb Scorpion one, that adds 2. So if you have a trait that adds 2, and then you pick the skill that has 2, then one Necrotech can take you from 1 Tomb Scorpion to 5. And that's an example of how you can start really spamming. Now you can, to a limited degree, do this with Ushabti as well, but it's split. You get +1 capacity for the regular ones and +1 capacity for Great Bow. So basically, unless you're using the Great Bow ones extensively, it may be not exactly what you want to invest in. So the Tomb Scorpions are great, but they're not the beefiest stuff in the army either, so you have to be careful about how you go about it. Now, the third one I want to talk about is important. The tier 3 of the cavalry building can be built in minor settlements. Now, the cavalry building goes up to tier 4, so that you can get Necropolis Knights with halberds. And you can only do that, obviously, in a major settlement. But you can do the other stuff in minor settlements. And that gives you 1 Necropolis Knight without halberds, and 2 sepulchral stalkers. Well, I hope I got the pronunciation right. I found that with stalkers, using one of them or using 2 of them, like from a single building, it's okay, but you're not going to feel you're getting a ton out of them. Now, if you have 3 or 4, then you can do some pretty awesome stuff. Then you can do the mad flanks against settlements. Then you can use them as a firing squad to try and take down large targets before they get into melee. Flying targets, flying lords. You can do a lot with them. So I strongly encourage, as I'm saying, the cavalry tier 3 building gives you access to 3 constructs. Ushabti gives 2, 1 Great Bow, 1 regular. Tomb Scorpion gives 1. So this is something to keep in mind. If you want raw numbers, of constructs in the early game, you want the cavalry buildings, because you cannot get the equivalent of that with the chariot building that gives you Screaming Skull Catapults. But if you've kept your original Screaming Skull Catapult, you cannot add to that capacity without building one full building to tier 3, then another one somewhere else, then another one somewhere else, and then you would finally get up to 3. And if you're not using the chariots non-stop, then there's not really a point to that. So for Khalida specifically, there are a couple of things that I really want to go over. Number 1 is that the Blessing of the Asp is 35 meters. It's not much. You really want to get used to its range. And that's very accurate in terms of the tabletop lore. So you really need to pack her with stuff. But you can pack her with some pretty awesome stuff. The thing is that archers may be the traditional stuff, but here's the thing. In Warhammer 3, everything got a reload nerf. You can't abuse this as far as you probably could have in Warhammer 2. But more on that later. The point is that the range isn't that great, but you can find out whether something is in range or not by just looking at the information on them and seeing if their weapon damage, their range, their missile damage, if that went up by like a lot. Because once she gets the true Blessing of the Asp, that's, it's a big buff. It's a big buff to anything that's a serious ranged unit. So if you're using Ushabti with Great Bows, if you're using sepulchral stalkers, which is, funny because Khalida herself does not have stock. So you really, really want to mix her with stuff that's doing the heavy damage. Yes, you can mix her with archers, but archers are damage over time, as they are now. But again, more on that later. Khalida, you have to think of her as cavalry even when she's on foot, because she has a stupidly large charge bonus, but she has a glass jaw. Now, later on, you get the Purify skill, and that gives her an increased vulnerability to fire, so you have to take care of that a little bit, but she also gains regeneration without needing an item for it. And that's very, very valuable. So until that point, she has something of a glass jaw, but that's fine. You just have to think of her as cavalry. The charge bonus is so large that you want to take her out of combat, have her take a tiny breather, and then go back in. Like, if you have to put her in combat, you should think of it as she's rushing out to knock down a specific threat, hopefully one that's been worn down, and then she finishes it off, and then she goes back to her range stuff and helps buff them, or she goes to another suitable target to start like knocking down enemy heroes if she's able to do so. So you should always think of her as cavalry even when she's not. And when she is, then you just do it more. So that's how you handle Khalida in combat, because she has no magic of her own, but the Venom Staff does become a sort of little medium-ranged artillery piece with 4 uses. That's a nice thing. So the bottom line for strategy with Khalida is that you have to act like nothing is sacred. Some things are less unsacred than others, but I'll get to that. The point is, you have to accept that you are going to lose armies, even Khalida's own starting army. You can't act as if the army is more valuable than your bigger strategic goals. If you have Kroq-Gar invading, and Kroq-Gar challenges you to battle, and you think, I'm probably going to lose, but I'll wipe out most of his army, and I have 2 other armies ready to come and finish him off. You take that fight. You do it every time, because even though you can Sun Tzu the hell out of the situation to try to maneuver things into the perfect engagement, the Tomb Kings are about resilience and coming back. That's why they get units to do a lot of raising the recruit rank for new recruits. That's why that you have even the ordinary Tomb King lords are immortal. They can be resurrected any number of times. The heroes, not so much. So if there's an exception to this, if you have a level 15 Necrotect, kick him out of the army, because your chances of gaining something from having that Necrotect immortal, unless you're really, really doing well, your chances are you're going to lose that hero and lose a lot of capacity for your constructs, rather than actually get any help in battle, because they are support. And in battle, their support is not really all that great, and your chances of losing them is tremendous. So unless they're immortal, you see where I'm going with this. It's a nasty cycle. Lich Priests become immortal at level 12. So I strongly encourage leveling them as much as possible, and then you can abuse them to no end. And they are basically the backbone of your entire faction. The Tomb Kings are the stars, but the Lich Priests are, they're what makes it go. Especially for Khalida, because she has no inherent magic herself, but she provides a buff to magic, so you want Lich Priests around her. More so even than other ones, other lords. But the bottom line is that you can't act like anything is sacred. Everything can be replaced. Everybody can be replaced. Just, babysit the Necrotects a little bit. But you have to be willing to sacrifice for the larger goals, because you're never going to have completely perfect battles and situations. Just you can occasionally, but you cannot rely on them. You have to be willing to push. So in terms of where to expand, here's the thing. In the long run, yes, you want to gather all the books of Nagash, but that's not going to happen until you have a pretty big breakout late in the campaign. And in the meantime, you need to expand, but you need to do it in a way that's not going to get you completely backdoor. I think that with the experience I've had, I have fought Thoric Ironbrow plenty of times, but he was willing to trade with me for a lot of these campaigns. Unless he literally takes one of your settlements in your home province, I think it's better to leave that Book of Nagash in Lost Plateau for much later in the game. Yes, it's nice, and if it's the 5th book, then to hell with the Stundies. But, unless it's really, really important, your chances of having Krokar turn against you if you go after Thorak, unless they are at war themselves, you really want to be at peace with him as long as possible because it's only late in the game that you have convenient tools for dealing with heavily armored targets. So it's going to be, very ugly battles unless and until you reach that point. And it's harder to, you can't just deploy with two armies side by side here. It's because of the time that it takes to have reinforcements come in. So even dwarves are going to start catching up with you by the time that you get reinforcements. It can be very awkward. It can be annoying to try to control 40 units. I mean, I don't do it on Legendary. It would be such a pain to try. But the point is that try to not have to go to war with the Order races if you don't really have to. Now, if you do, you have to take care of business. But it's okay to be at peace with them. On the other hand, Queek head take Queek head taker has to die, basically. You have every reason to go up in that direction and just raise everything. Well, I mean, not really. You're conquering everything that you can. But if you have one narrow front to worry about, that's fine. But here's the thing with going after a Skarbrand. Skarbrand, if he doesn't want to fight you, he can lead you around by the nose forever. There's enough chaos corruption in certain places, and there's swamps that you cannot eliminate swamp because it's not a type of corruption. It's just a type of terrain attrition. So he can lead you around the nose for ages and ages. You need stuff that you can actually find an actual settlement and have a fight. And if it takes you a while to besiege it, to wear it down, you need to have a narrow front if you want to get the best out of multiple armies without worrying too much about your back door. That's the hope, at least. So at least try to have a situation that allows you to do it. And if you don't, well, it'll slow you down, but you can deal with it. You can just deal with it through attrition because you can come back from attrition, from a war of attrition, much better than the other factions. For the most part. For the most part. So that's it for the basic strategy is just you need more territory, but you have to pick and choose where to do it or deal with wars that have come to you. Now on to more brass tacks. The style of army Khalida wants is a ranged army, but that has a big weakness in Warhammer 3. You are vulnerable to being punched in the face. If an enemy army has like 15 dwarf warriors, how are you going to deal with that if you have a small front line? You're really not. You're hoping that over time, your Cascade of Skulls is going to wipe out more of the enemy units than yours, because friendly fire is a big problem with catapults and cascades. And also, if you have lots of skeleton archers, Skarbrand loves to just ignore your forces and just beat his way into your back line. I have the hope when I find him. I mean, I'm desperately trying to hold off the rest of his army while like he will come in, but I want him to be as weak as possible when he does so that I can have Khalida herself take him on, and so on and so forth. It becomes even dicier with the other Tomb Kings. So it's just you are trying your hardest to keep people from coming into your back line. So the types of armies that Khalida favors are ranged heavy and ranged heavy because of the reload nerf. You have to treat it as damage over time because you have very little upfront damage. And one big exception, the Stalkers. Now, the Stalkers lose a lot of value if they are, if somebody gets to close range. So there will be situations where you just plain throw away a Tomb Prince, especially on foot, and to slow something down long enough for those really, really hard-hitting, spitting attacks. I think in lore that's the eyes that get them, but whatever. They have to have things in game. So the idea is that's where some really strong anti-armor upfront damage comes from. You can snipe lures out of the sky with it. You can do a lot with that stuff, but you have to be sneaky, and you have to just be able to divide and conquer somehow. But if you have multiple stalkers, then at least if large units just crowd them, like Black Knights just crowd them, they'll still be able to fight off that with, it'll take a while for them to start going down. That's what I'm saying. They are not the best at killing unless they are doing their ranged attacks, but they can hold, especially if you get more campaign buffs for them. Like Khalida has campaign buffs for her own army in addition to whatever text you have. So that's very nice. And that's where you have other things like Necropolis Knights playing linebacker and roaming around and doing anti-armor damage on anything they can get into the backside. Very nice. Very, very nice. Things like that. You have to expect that things want to get into your backline. You have to have an answer for it. Now, really late game, you can have like a Necrosphinx, and that's going to help you with the really big targets and really clean up stuff for you. But until you start getting them, you just have to plan for it. Sometimes you have to just, well, one of two things. One would be having just a bigger front line, and that means having less units that can reliably kill the enemy. Now, Tomb Guard are very good at killing the enemy if they're the right kinds of enemies. The problem with that is that these types of enemies are almost never dwarves, so that's why I really love my Necropolis Knights for helping deal with that. And also, even just your Screaming Skull Catapults, great anti-armor damage, but again, when they actually reach your lines finally, I mean, they're dwarves, but eventually they'll arrive. It's tough, so you just have to plan ahead for it. The other is, even though Khalida is by lore associated with archers so much, the thing is that once you reach late game, just dump archers and use stalkers. More or less. You'll have your Ushabti with great bows. You'll have your bone giants thrown in. You'll have your artillery, but actually de-emphasize archers and go for higher end constructs. And that leaves you with enough capacity to get a decent front line to protect your assets. But you're also just not relying on your archers because your archers are docked. Your archers are damaged over time. Although I will say that the Regiment of Renown one with Armor Sundering is very, very valuable. So you definitely want to abuse that in the early game. I mean, late game too, but I mean, it's more that you lack the ways to deal with armor in the early to mid game. Therefore, any kind of armor sundering is really nice. Now, one option I want to give you for Khalida is to just spec her into melee, because she is the person who's going to clean up a lot of your enemies. If you have a problem, Khalida is the solution in quite a few cases, because once she gets regeneration and she's on her Necroserpent, then she has the capability to hold stuff down long enough that she can actually do enough damage to overcome it with a little bit of help. A little bit of help, and you can get all sorts of help to that degree from elsewhere in the army. She can do a lot to take down enemy lords. And once you get that charge bonus to really crazy levels, I mean, you're talking like 135 or something, then you can be very good with her. And you can also use her with, say, a potion of strength. And I'll get more into the mortuary cult in a second, but the point is that if you spec her as melee, she can solve a lot of problems directly. It's not always the best solution, but I mean, eventually you want her to have that capability. If you can do without it, if you can get things done with other builds, that's fine. But the point is that you're just doing okay. Once you get her quite late game that you can make her into a melee monster also, you have options. I mean, I like her red line. I really want to exploit it a lot, but it's always good to have Khalida able to just go up to something and munch it. And also, this is just neither here nor there, but her entire army gets poisoned. That's one of her base benefits, and it's really helpful over the long campaigns. It just helps over and over again for free. You don't have to do anything for it. It's just constantly there helping. So that's always nice. And a final piece of advice I just wanted to give, and this is something that is hardly relevant only to Khalida, but because of her situation, because of the difficulty of the starting position, you have to be sneaky also. You want to be aggressive, but you want to be aggressive and do all kinds of ambushes and catch people in ambushes when you can. That's helpful. It really does help. And she gets basic bonuses to it. And if you spec her into the blue line, you can get even more bonuses to it. If sandstorms are going on, you get ridiculous bonuses to it. So if you can actually get enemies to fall into your ambushes, it makes your life easier. So you definitely want that. So that's one big piece of advice. You have to be aggressive with your campaign in a big picture, but you also want to be sneaky about how you do it in the field at any given moment. If you can. If you can. Sometimes you just have to smash people down and take your losses. One of the last things I want to cover is the Mortuary cult. It's just hard to use as Khalida, and that's because that your access to trading resources is pretty limited, and you have higher priorities usually. So you want to use it much more late game. It's very convenient for certain things because you do gain access to potions of strength at a pretty liberal early stage. They're very nice, but you have to basically control your enthusiasm. You have to restrain yourself because you have higher priorities than the mortuary cult stuff. There are cases where you want that army that's 10,000 gold and 800 canopic jars, but yeah. Uh, the Mortuary Cult is really good, but Khalida has a hard time using it, so you just have to bump it down the road. And the final thing I want to wrap up on is simply what you should do with your canopic jars, because that's your big strategic resource. Now, I don't think anybody needs to be explained how to gather more jars. I mean, you do it with battles, and I would encourage you to do that as much as possible, as much as your campaign allows. You also have the passive gathering with wise characters, and also you can spec your Tomb Kings, which will never die, into Kanaki Jar hoarding, and then when you replace them with bigger and better ones later down the line, they'll just be passively accumulating these jars for you no matter what happens. But in the big picture, I'll just say the heralds are really important. You want the heralds awakened, you want the global recruitment help. The extra army is great, but the global recruitment thing is just for an expansionist, for dealing with in-game crisis stuff, for just you have to stop and retool, and you don't want to wait forever getting things like Necropolis Knights in the army. You really want those heralds awakened. So even though that you have some very, very juicy Tomb King options from the various dynasties you're awakening, you really, 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 really want to put those jars towards the heralds as much as possible. And until they're done, they're not done. You need, I mean, the ancillaries are very nice to have. They are just, they're making you better at things you're already pretty good at. The one that gives frenzy to Ushabti units, I really like because it really raises their uh, potential in battle. But the point is that you need to have the heroes that come with 100 jars. But in terms of the actual lords, I'd say put them on the back burner until you get the heralds awakened in the tech tree. Because the heralds that you do get as ancillaries, they are helpful. They will make Khalida better herself. They will make other lords better, but it's the part that where you have the army at the end of the Herald's Awakening and just the global recruitment buff. It's very, very good for your long term. The earlier you get it, the better. So try to get it, and then you can worry about the other stuff. Not so much. I'm not sure I'd recommend something that was old advice, which was research up to where you're about to unlock a new dynasty and then skip to another dynasty and after another dynasty, because that really slows down when you're getting the text for unit improvements within them. So I'm not sure you're really getting ahead like that, but the Heralds one, yes. The Heralds one, if you have the jars, push it hard. And then it's out of the way, and it will keep helping you passively for the rest of the campaign. But the thing is that the endgame crisis will come long before you're ready to take all the rest of the books in the bash. So, okay? So you have to think in terms of the long run here and just make things as you have to suffer through certain parts of the game before you're really, really starting to roll. So you just want to make the part where you're rolling come as nicely and smoothly as possible, as early as possible. And the heralds, once you awaken them, it does help. And then you can just keep adding armies, you keep adding heroes, That's how you start steamrolling. And so it's controlled aggression, it's being sneaky during the controlled aggression, it's not treating things as too sacred, it's using gangs of constructs on things, because one here and one there is not nearly as helpful as a gang of them. They don't have to be, I mean, you're not doom stacking, you're just having little posses of them, but they're still far more effective than just tossing them in piecemeal. You can make a lot happen with just your basic skeletons too, but it's not as fun, and it's not as thrilling, and it's not as cinematic, and also you just will feel a much larger margin for error if you have lots of constructs. So early game, late game, you have a mix, but you just need to find your mixes and be aggressive with them, because often what you're doing is going to hurt the other guy a lot more than it hurts you. So you have to accept you're going to take those losses, take the lumps, but you are going to win in the end. That's the Tomb King's attitude, that's the Khalida attitude. So even if she has to get wounded once in a while, if it's for the bigger cause, you gotta do it. Anyway, take care, have fun. Fun's the real important part, and I hope that you liked this video, and if you did, consider subscribing, because I'm trying to do more of this stuff all the time. Take care, and have lots of fun.